He once thought love was something you could abandon like an old script. That was his mistake. Now, years later, fate sat him in a room with the very man he had left behind, only he didn't know it yet. The loft smelled faintly of turpentine and old wood, the kind of space that made inspiration feel inevitable. Daniel Hart, the rising star of New York's indie film scene, leaned against the edge of his camera stand, watching as the art model stepped into the golden beam of light. The man wore nothing but a draped white sheet, shoulders bare, angles of his jaw sharp against the shadow. There was something about him, something too familiar. Daniel shook the thought away, adjusting his lens. He had no time for distraction. His passion project was on the line, and this anonymous model had been recommended as the perfect muse. He only needed to capture the raw vulnerability of a body, not the story behind the man wearing it. Yet as the model moved, his hand grazing the sheet at his hip, Daniel's chest tightened. It wasn't lust, though God knew the attraction was palpable. It was recognition. A ghost flickering in the corner of his memory. "Hold still," Daniel murmured, voice lower than intended. The model obeyed, his eyes locking onto Daniel's. The intensity in them was almost unbearably an unspoken accusation. A longing, a secret Daniel couldn't name. What Daniel didn't know was that beneath the carefully hidden shadows, behind the name signed only as Elias on the contract, stood Adrian Cole, his Adrian. The boy he once swore to love forever before crushing his heart with silence and absence. The man he left behind in a small apartment 5 years ago, chasing fame and films, believing he could outrun love without consequence. Adrian had spent years burying the hurt, painting over it with art and anonymity. But when he accepted the modeling job for Daniel's project, it wasn't coincidence. It was choice, a dangerous, masochistic one. He wanted Daniel to look at him and not recognize him. He wanted to see if the man who had abandoned him would fall again, this time without knowing who he was falling for. And Daniel was already falling. The session ended with silence. Daniel gathered his gear, trying to shake the strange weight pressing on his chest. The model slipped his shirt back on with quiet grace, like a man who had long since learned to protect himself. "You're good," Daniel said finally, words feeling inadequate. "You have presence." A bitter smile flickered across Adrian's hidden face. "Presence. That's what you see. Not the love you broke. Not the nights I waited for your call. Just presence." "Thank you," Adrian replied simply, his voice lower, practiced in disguise. He turned, making sure the angle of his profile stayed in shadow. Daniel hesitated, as if wanting to ask something more. But instead, he nodded and left. Adrian sat alone in the loft for a while, the silence deafening. He closed his eyes, the old wound reopening, bleeding quietly. He should have walked away from this madness. But part of him craved the danger of proximity. Maybe he wanted Daniel to suffer the same confusion he had once felt, the same helpless hunger for something out of reach. The next day, Daniel couldn't focus. Not on his script, not on his actors, not even on his meticulously planned shots. Elias haunted him. The way his body spoke without words. The way his eyes seemed to carry a universe of unsaid things. Daniel hated that it lingered, so he called him back. Another session. Another chance to study him. Another dangerous step closer to a truth he wasn't prepared to face. When Adrian walked into the studio, Daniel caught himself staring too long. Their interactions stayed professional, but the undercurrent was undeniable. Their words might have been about light, angle, composition, but their silences screamed of something deeper. "Do you ever get tired of being looked at?" Daniel asked suddenly, lowering his camera. Adrian's throat tightened. He forced a smile. "Do you ever get tired of looking?" The question hit Daniel harder than expected. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and for a fleeting moment, Adrian saw the same man who once kissed him in the rain, who once whispered promises against his skin. The past hovered between them like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Adrian clenched his fists in the sheets, steadying his breath. He couldn't let Daniel see. Not yet, because this wasn't just about rekindling love. It was about revenge, or at least justice. To make Daniel fall, to let him taste longing and uncertainty, to let him feel what abandonment truly meant. But revenge was never clean, and Adrian knew, deep down, he was already trembling on the edge of forgiveness. Daniel spent that night replaying the session in his mind. His attraction to Elias wasn't normal, it was visceral, as though he had known him before. The curve of his mouth, the sadness in his eyes gnawed at Daniel like an old wound he couldn't place. For the first time in years, Daniel couldn't sleep. Not because of deadlines, not because of the film, but because of a man. Because of Elias. And Adrian, alone in his apartment, whispered into the night the words Daniel would never hear. "You don't even remember me." And that's the cruelest part. The city outside was loud with its usual noise, honking cabs, conversations spilling out of bars, the muted thrum of subway trains underfoot, but Daniel barely noticed any of it. He sat in his apartment staring at his storyboard, the neat sketches of actors frozen in planned movements. They should have excited him, ignited the fire that had pushed him to claw his way into the indie film world. Instead, the paper looked dead, lifeless, because every image he drew, every face he imagined, twisted into Elias. He cursed under his breath, slamming the sketchbook shut. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had models all the time, muses for projects, people who walked in and out of his vision without leaving so much as a scratch on his mind. Why this one? Why this stranger with the haunted eyes? Daniel picked up his phone, scrolling past the dozens of unread emails, the congratulatory messages about his film's nomination at Tribeca, the demands from his agent. His thumb hovered over Elias's number, the one the modeling agency had provided. Too soon, he told himself. Too unprofessional. And yet, his fingers moved anyway. The call rang twice before a quiet voice answered. "Hello, Elias." Daniel almost winced at how quickly he said the name, like he'd been waiting for it. "It's Daniel. You need another session." There was a pause that stretched, heavy. Then Adrian replied, voice calm. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. The light in the loft is perfect then." "All right," Adrian said, though his tone carried no warmth. "I'll be there." Daniel ended the call, heart thudding harder than it should. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He tried to convince himself it was all about the film, about chasing authenticity. But deep down, he knew the truth wanted to see Elias again, to stand close enough to feel that strange familiarity burn through his chest. Adrian hung up and placed his phone face down on the kitchen table. His apartment was small, walls littered with half-finished sketches and canvases leaning against one another. It was nothing like the glamorous spaces Daniel must have been used to now, nothing like the world Adrian had once been part of with him. His hand trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. He hated that he still felt this way, hated that a single call could unravel the armor he had built over 5 years. "He doesn't even know who you are." That thought was both a shield and a knife. Adrian exhaled smoke, bitter and slow. He told himself he was doing this for closure, to remind himself how easy it was for Daniel to forget, to discard, to move on. He told himself it was about control this time, he would decide when the story ended. But the ache in his chest whispered otherwise. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the loft early. The air was crisp, golden sunlight flooding through the tall windows. He arranged his cameras, checked the lighting, fussed over details more than usual. He told himself it was because he cared about the work. When Adrian arrived, Daniel almost forgot to breathe. The man wore simple jeans and a black t-shirt, hair slightly tousled from the wind outside. Nothing extravagant, nothing staged, yet he looked like he carried a piece of the city itself in his presence. "Morning," Adrian said evenly, setting his bag down. "Morning," Daniel replied, his voice softer than he intended. They worked in silence at first, Daniel giving quiet instructions, Adrian holding poses. The camera clicked, the loft filled with the mechanical rhythm of shutter and breath. But Daniel couldn't keep the questions inside anymore. "You ever think about what people see when they look at you?" he asked suddenly, lowering the camera. Adrian's eyes flicked toward him, guarded. "All the time. That's the curse of being looked at. You start wondering if they're seeing you or just what they want to see." Daniel felt the words land deep. He swallowed. "And what do you think I'm seeing?" Adrian smirked faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's your secret to keep." The tension between them grew thicker with every exchanged glance. Daniel's heart pounded. He didn't understand this pull, this gravity. It was maddening. He wanted to ask who Elias really was, where he came from, What story hid behind those eyes, but the professional in him stayed silent. Still, his hand betrayed him. When Adrian shifted, the sheet slipping slightly from his shoulder, Daniel reached out instinctively to adjust it. His fingers brushed skin warm, familiar, electric. The world stilled. Adrian froze, every nerve screaming from that single touch. For a second, the years peeled away, and he was 22 again, standing in their old apartment with Daniel's hands on his skin, Daniel's laughter in his ear, Daniel's love written all over him. Then he pulled back, hard, wrapping the sheet tighter around his body. "Don't." His voice was sharp, colder than he intended. Daniel blinked, startled. "I'm sorry, you don't need to touch me for the shot," Adrian interrupted, his jaw tight. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel looked away, guilt pressing at his chest. He crossed a line. He didn't even know why he had done it. His body had acted like it recognized something his mind couldn't. They finished the session with minimal words. When it was over, Adrian dressed quickly and left without so much as a backward glance. Daniel stood in the empty loft, staring at the door long after it closed. That night, Daniel poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared at the photographs he had taken. Each image of Elias felt too alive. He zoomed in on the model's eyes, tracing the faint shadows, the quiet sorrow embedded in them. And then it hit him. A memory. Flash. A night years ago, on a rain-slick street in Chicago. The man he had kissed under a flickering streetlight, rain dripping from their eyelashes, eyes burning with the same sorrowful fire. Daniel's stomach dropped. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "It can't be." But the resemblance was undeniable. The jawline, the way the eyes held both defiance and fragility, the slight tilt of the mouth. Adrian. His Adrian. The man he had left behind. Daniel pressed his palms to his face, heart racing. If it was true, if Elias was Adrian, then everything he thought he had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. The guilt, the shame, the regret. He had abandoned Adrian for ambition, too cowardly to hold both love and dreams in the same hand. And now fate had delivered him back into his life, disguised, unrecognizable until now. Daniel couldn't decide if it was punishment or mercy. Adrian, meanwhile, lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. He replayed every second of the session, every flicker of recognition that seemed to cross Daniel's face. Had he noticed? Had the mask slipped? Adrian bit his lip until it bled. Part of him wanted Daniel to see, to remember, to fall to his knees with apologies that came 5 years too late. But another part, the wounded, guarded part, wanted him to stay blind, to suffer the ache of unknowing just as Adrian had suffered the ache of abandonment. The contradiction tore him apart. He turned onto his side, burying his face in the pillow. He whispered into the dark, "What do you want from me, Daniel?" The silence gave no answer. The next session was different. Daniel didn't speak much. His hands trembled as he adjusted the camera, his eyes flicking to Adrian with a new intensity, a new awareness. Adrian felt it immediately. The way Daniel looked at him had changed. It was no longer curiosity, no longer just attraction. It was recognition. His chest tightened. His carefully constructed disguise, his years of distance, were cracking. "Elias," Daniel said softly during a break, voice almost breaking on the name. Have we met before?" Adrian froze. The air seemed to leave the room. His heart screamed yes. His lips whispered the opposite. No, Daniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't press. He just nodded. Eyes dark with a storm Adrian recognized all too well, the same storm that had once lived in him years ago, when their love was everything and nothing at once. The battle lines were drawn. Neither of them knew how long they could keep pretending. Daniel couldn't stop staring. Every time Eliasno, Adrian shifted in front of the camera, the veil of anonymity slipped a little more. He wasn't just seeing a model anymore. He was seeing memories superimposed onto flesh and bone. The soft curl of a smile that once greeted him in the mornings. The distant sadness in eyes that had stared at him across a train platform the day he left. It was madness to doubt himself, wasn't it? Elias might simply remind him of Adrian. The human mind loved to connect dots, to paint familiarity where there was none. But when Daniel looked through the lens, it was like the years dissolved and he was back in their Chicago apartment, Adrian sitting on the windowsill sketching while the city hummed below. His hands trembled on the camera. "Hold still," he muttered, though it was more to himself than to the man in front of him. Adrian tilted his chin upward, letting the light graze his jaw. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, but inside, his heart was rioting. He could feel Daniel's eyes searching, probing, recognizing. This was dangerous. He had wanted Daniel to fall again, to taste longing without the balm of closure. But now the look in Daniel's eyes terrified him. Not because it was distant, but because it was familiar, achingly, heartbreakingly familiar. When the session ended, Daniel lingered. He pretended to pack up slowly, fiddling with equipment he had no reason to touch. He just couldn't bring himself to let Adrian leave. "Elias?" he said at last, voice tight. "Do you ever think about the past?" Adrian froze as he pulled his shirt over his head. The question landed like a blade. He forced his tone flat. "The past doesn't pay the bills." "Why? Do you?" Daniel's throat tightened. "More than I should." Their eyes met. For a fleeting second, Adrian almost said his name, almost confessed. But then he remembered the years of silence, the hollow nights, the broken promises, and the word died on his tongue. "I'll see you next week," Adrian said instead, gathering his bag and walking out before Daniel could stop him. That night, Daniel dug through old boxes shoved into the back of his closet. He hadn't touched them in years, relics of a younger, more reckless self. But his hands shook as he opened the lid and pulled out a bundle of photographs. There it was. Adrian, caught in candid moments, sketching on the porch, laughing with paint on his hands, staring straight into the lens with that quiet, disarming intensity. Daniel compared them to the images on his computer. The resemblance was more than resemblance. It was truth. His chest constricted, breath short. "My God!" he whispered to the empty apartment. It was him. It had always been him. The next session, Daniel could hardly keep his composure. He tried to act professional, to speak like a director, but the words caught in his throat. Every movement Adrian made was a ghost come alive. At one point, Daniel lowered his camera and blurted, "Why didn't you tell me?" Adrian stiffened, the sheet slipping from his shoulder. "Tell you what? That you're him." Daniel's voice cracked. "That you're Adrian." The room went silent, the kind of silence that makes your pulse louder than the world. Adrian's body went rigid. For years he had imagined this moment, Daniel recognizing him, finally bearing the weight of what he had done. But now that it was here, he felt stripped, defenseless. Slowly he turned, meeting Daniel's gaze head-on. The shadows no longer hid him. "So you remember." Daniel stepped closer, words tumbling out in broken fragments. I thought I was imagining it. God, Adrian, why didn't you?" Adrian cut him off, voice sharp. "Why didn't I what? Run to you with open arms? Tell you I was the man you left behind while you chased your dream? Why would I give you that power again?" The fury in his tone pierced Daniel deeper than any accusation. "I was young," Daniel said desperately. "I was scared. I thought I couldn't have both you and my career. So you chose yourself," Adrian spat. "You chose ambition over love. You left me in an apartment I couldn't afford, with promises you shattered the minute a better offer came along." Daniel's chest heaved. Shame burned in his gut, sharper now than it ever had been. I know what I did, and I regret it every single day." Adrian's laugh was bitter, empty. Regret doesn't undo 5 years of silence. They stood facing each other, the space between them heavy with everything unsaid. Daniel wanted to close the distance, to reach out and hold him like he once did, but he knew that touch would burn. Finally, Adrian tore his gaze away. "This was a mistake," he muttered. He grabbed his bag and headed for the door. Daniel's voice broke after him. "Please don't walk away again." Adrian froze in the doorway, trembling. The irony of the words cut deep. "Don't walk away again? You're the one who walked away first." But he didn't say it. He just left. The following days were chaos for both of them. Daniel buried himself in editing, trying to lose himself in work, but every frame screamed Adrian. His producer scolded him for being distracted. His agent reminded him of deadlines, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that Adrian was here, alive, within reach, and slipping away all over again. Adrian, on the other hand, wrestled with a storm he couldn't contain. He told himself he had gotten what he wanted: Daniel's recognition, Daniel's guilt. He should feel triumphant. But instead, he felt hollow. Revenge tasted like ash. Because even now, even after everything, part of him still loved Daniel. That was the cruelest truth of all. Their inevitable confrontation came a week later. Adrian had declined further sessions, sending a polite message to the agency. But Daniel showed up at his apartment anyway, drenched from the rain, desperation written across his face. Adrian opened the door, startled. "How did you— Your address was on the release forms," Daniel said, voice rough. "I had to see you." Adrian's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be here." "Please," Daniel whispered. His eyes shone with something raw, unguarded. "Just hear me out." Against his better judgment, Adrian let him in. The apartment was dim, canvases stacked against the walls, the smell of turpentine lingering. Daniel glanced around, his chest aching at the sight of Adrian's world, an artist's world, a world he had once shared. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Daniel began, standing awkwardly near the door. "I know that, but I can't pretend I don't still feel—" "Don't," Adrian snapped, cutting him off. His hands shook as he crossed his arms. "You don't get to come back after 5 years and talk about feelings. You don't get to rewrite history because you're lonely now." Daniel flinched. "I'm not lonely. I'm haunted." Adrian's breath hitched. Daniel stepped forward, words spilling from him like a flood. "Every success I've had, every award, every red carpet, it's all been empty without you. I thought I was doing the right thing, choosing the dream. But what's a dream if the one person you want to share it with isn't there?" Adrian stared at him, torn between rage and longing. He wanted to scream. He wanted to kiss him. He wanted to do both at once. "You don't get to say that now," he whispered, voice cracking. "You don't get to need me after making me believe I wasn't worth staying for." Daniel's eyes burned. "You were worth everything. I was just too blind to see it." The silence stretched, thick with years of love and pain. Adrian finally turned away, blinking hard. "You should go." Daniel swallowed, chest breaking. He nodded, stepping back toward the door. But before leaving, he whispered, "I'll wait as long as it takes." The door closed behind him, leaving Adrian trembling, tears streaking down his face. That night, Adrian sat at his easel, sketching furiously. His hands moved with desperation, lines cutting across the page until a face emerged: Daniel's face. Not the polished director the world knew, but the boy who once held his heart. And as the rain hammered the city outside, Adrian realized the truth he had been denying. He still loved him. The days that followed felt like a purgatory neither of them could escape. Daniel carried on with his work, but his heart wasn't in it. Scenes felt flat, actors looked hollow, dialogue lost its weight. His crew noticed his distraction, whispered about the director's sudden temper, the long silences where he stared at nothing. He brushed them off, but inside, every fiber of him throbbed with the same name: Adrian. Adrian wasn't faring any better. He painted obsessively, working late into the night, as if each stroke could bleed out the storm inside him. Canvases piled upangry lines, blurred faces, half-finished portraits that all, in some way, resembled Daniel. He wanted to paint him out of his system. Instead, the man only seeped deeper. It was impossible to hate someone when you still remembered the way their arms felt around you at dawn. A week later, they crossed paths again, this time by chance. Daniel had wandered into a small gallery in Brooklyn, hoping the art would silence his restless mind. But when he turned the corner, he froze. There, on the wall, hung a series of charcoal sketches, all of the same man, him. His heart lurched as he recognized the hand that drew them. Adrian's hand. He spun, and there Adrian was, standing near the back of the room, his posture tense, as if expecting confrontation. Their eyes met across the crowd, and it was like the gallery vanished. Daniel moved toward him before he could think. "You drew me." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I draw what haunts me." The words cut sharp, but they also cracked Daniel open. He stepped closer, voice low. "I haunt you too?" Adrian's eyes flickered, full of resistance and longing. "Don't twist this. Drawing you doesn't mean I forgive you." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Daniel whispered. "I'm asking for a chance." Adrian's chest rose and fell rapidly. The air between them was charged, unbearable. He wanted to push Daniel away, to remind him of the years lost, the pain endured. But then Daniel's hand brushed his light, trembling, as if seeking permission. And Adrian didn't pull back. That night, they ended up in Adrian's apartment again. The tension finally snapped, not with words but with touch-hungry, desperate, tender in ways neither had expected. Clothes fell carelessly to the floor, but what stripped them bare wasn't the nudity, it was the vulnerability. Adrian kissed him like he hated him, like he loved him, like he didn't know which was truer. Daniel kissed him back like a drowning man clawing for air. After, they lay tangled on the bed, the city lights seeping through the blinds. Adrian stared at the ceiling, silent. Daniel turned to him, voice raw. "I know I don't deserve this, but if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you're more important than anything else. No more running. No more choosing ambition over love. Just us." Adrian closed his eyes. His body ached with memory, his heart with fear. But beneath it all, there was still that unshakable truth. He loved Daniel. Even after everything. He turned, resting his forehead against Daniel's. "If you hurt me again, I won't survive it." Daniel's voice broke. "Then I'll never let it happen." The weeks after were fragile, tentative. They moved carefully, relearning each other in fragments, morning coffees, late-night walks, shared silences. Trust didn't rebuild overnight, but brick by brick, it began to rise again. There were fights, of course. Adrian's wounds ran deep, and Daniel's guilt was a constant shadow. Sometimes they snapped, sometimes they retreated into old habits of silence. But every time, they returned to each other, unwilling to let go again. For Daniel, the film he had been working on shifted entirely. He scrapped half the script, rewriting it from the ground up. His producer nearly had a heart attack, but Daniel didn't care. He wanted to tell a story about love, not the polished Hollywood kind, but the messy, broken, resilient kind he now understood. He asked Adrian to model for the film's poster. This time, Adrian didn't hide his face. When the film premiered at Tribeca, Daniel stood in the audience, hand clasped tightly in Adrian's. The story on screen was theirs in disguise. About two men who loved, lost, and found each other again. The crowd erupted in applause. Critics praised its raw honesty, but none of it mattered to Daniel. The only review that mattered was the quiet squeeze of Adrian's hand. Later, under the string lights of the festival courtyard, Adrian whispered, "I never thought I'd see the day you'd choose me over everything else." Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to his temple. "I didn't choose you over everything else. I chose you because you are everything." Adrian's throat tightened, tears glinting in his eyes. For the first time in years, the ache inside him eased. Months passed. The city moved on, but Daniel and Adrian built something steady amid its chaos. Their scars didn't vanish, but they learned to live with them, to weave them into the fabric of their love. One crisp autumn morning, they stood together in the loft where it all began, the same golden light spilling through the windows. Daniel set up his camera, but this time, there was no pretense of anonymity, no disguise. "Ready?" Daniel asked, smiling. Adrian smirked softly. "Always." The shutter clicked, and in that moment, captured forever in light and shadow, they weren't just a director and his model, or ex-lovers haunted by regret. They were two men who had walked through fire, carrying both pain and forgiveness, and found their way back to each other. Not perfect, not unscarred, but whole, together. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.